Hello, my name is John Eltman. I'm one of the baseball coaches at Papillion La Vista South. My role at Papio South is I'm the head JV coach, and my area of expertise is primarily working with our pitchers at the junior varsity and varsity level. Today I'm just going to give you a brief breakdown of Colin's pitching mechanics from some video that we took during our summer camp in early June. We'll talk briefly about just some basic pitching mechanic philosophies, things that we really believe in at Papio South, and then try and give you some things that maybe Colin can focus on this offseason in preparation for next year. Okay, just real quick kind of rundown or crash course on pitching mechanics. When we look at pitchers' videos, we primarily focus on their hips and their lower half, especially early in delivery, because we believe that if we can get the first few steps right, the rest of the delivery will mostly take care of itself. Okay, to keep things simple, we break the pitch and delivery down into 5 main phases: hip load, hip lead, hip separation, release, and follow through. We primarily focus on hip load and hip lead because we think that if we can get those 2 steps right, the rest of the delivery mostly takes care of itself. Okay, it's like a domino effect. One thing leads to another, and so if we don't get the first 2 steps right, it's really hard for our body to correct itself, and it leads to a lot of downstream issues that you'll see as a result of what happened earlier in the delivery. Okay, so I'm going to use Marcus Stroman here on the left to kind of show you some of our core principles that we believe for pitching mechanics, and then we'll use that to compare what Colin is doing. Okay, so first, hip load. Hip load is when we lift our leg and load our hips to prepare ourselves to move down the mound. So when we hip load, we want to see that front knee move towards the back ear and back shoulder. We want to see that post leg stay relatively tall. Might have a little bit of flexion in there, just like Marcus has there. Okay, and we want to see our hips get loaded. So what do we mean by that? That means we want to see a little bit of counter rotation in our hips. Okay, so you'll notice he turns his hips just ever so slightly as he gets to the top of his leg lift. Okay. You'll notice that his back knee rotates ever so slightly also. Okay, and that's a result of getting our hips loaded. All right, so we don't necessarily want to actively turn the knee out. It's more of a result of the counter rotation of the hips. Okay, we also want to see that front hip being elevated ever so slightly as we start to move down the mound. Okay, so that's hip load. All right, hip lead is leading with our hips down the mound in a way that's efficient, a way for us to efficiently set up rotation. Okay, so one thing I want you to notice is as Marcus leads with his hips, his front hip stays elevated, his shoulders match the elevation of his hips, and his trunk stays stacked and back. All right, this is really important that it allows him to rotate well into front foot strike. You'll also notice his back knee stays stacked and his butt sits back behind his heel as he moves into front foot strike. Okay, this is hip lead. All right, this allows us to efficiently transfer energy up our legs through our trunk and into our arm as we rotate into front foot strike. Okay, as he goes and his front foot lands, we create what's known as hip to shoulder separation. Okay, this is where the belt buckles point towards home, and the chest is pointed towards third, and the arm is cocked up at about 90 degrees. Any range between 80 to 100 degrees is ideal. Okay, in this case, we create basically a giant elastic rubber band. The body becomes a giant rubber band, and it transfers energy from the legs through the hips, out the trunk, and then into the arm. All right, usually what happens here at hip to shoulder separation is a result of everything that's happened earlier in the delivery. Okay, so hip separation, release, follow through, all of that follows because everything was good at the beginning. Okay, so that's like a crash course on mechanics. All right, so let's take a look now at Colin. So Colin goes into his leg lift. All right, back leg is tall, knee goes towards his front ear, that's good. Okay, but you'll notice that as he goes into hip lead, I want you to watch his front leg. Okay, it comes up, then it comes down, and then it steps out. Okay, anytime I see guys do this up, down, and out motion, what that tells me is they're not sitting back on their heel, and they're not using that back leg to drive themselves down the mound. All right, essentially what they're doing is they're just taking that front leg, they're stepping out and stepping open. And so the front leg is what's opening up their hips, not the back leg. And so you'll notice that when Colin moves down the mound here, all right, he almost over rotates, and he steps open too far. All right, and that's because his front leg is just swinging open. And as soon as that front leg swings open like that, all right, you'll notice he creates basically zero hip to shoulder separation. Okay, his belt buckle and chest are both pointing in the same direction. And so he's basically at this point throwing all arm. Okay, I also want you to notice his arm, that front foot strike, it's not quite up. All right, we want to see that thing a little bit more vertical. And so this might mean that his arm could be late, particularly on this pitch, which has a tendency to lead to command issues, has a tendency to lead to arm issues in the shoulder and the elbow. And so all of this is a result of poor hip load and hip lead early in the delivery. Okay, so we would really want to focus on getting this corrected with Colin. All right, if you watch his arm action, there's also some issues here. Okay, notice this position right here. Okay, this is known in the baseball circles as inverted W, and a lot of guys with elbow issues have this similar arm pattern. The reason they have this is because they're not using their legs well, and so their body is basically searching for a way to try and throw hard and keep itself from landing too early on the front leg. And so it goes into this position to try and keep itself back, to keep its trunk back, so that way it can create as much energy as possible. The problem is all that energy goes into the shoulder and the elbow, and we throw all arm, and it can lead to arm injuries, command, and decreased velocity. So we would want to spend a lot of time working on Colin's lower half in order to correct some of these issues. Okay, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm an open book. I'm always willing to talk baseball and talk pitching. My phone number is 402-806-1723. Like I said, don't hesitate to ask any questions if you have them. And thank you for your time, and go Titans.